Welcome to the TomorrowZone Catalyst Podcast, where we dive into conversations that spark innovation and shape the future. I'm your host, Deborah Reuben, founder and CEO of TomorrowZone. Today's episode is a special one. I'm joined by the brilliant Michele Toland. She is a trailblazer in lending and leasing operations and a creative force behind human-centric digital solutions and a key player on our team here at TomorrowZone. So together, we're exploring the challenges and best practices for successful adoption of new technologies. A lot of the work that we do is in the trillion-dollar equipment leasing and finance industry, where many companies today are on a mission to modernize, digitize, and adopt technologies that will enable them to shape a more awesome future for their employees and their customers, and to achieve their growth goals. But the problem that I see all too often is that many leaders seem to think that it's all about selecting and buying the right software. Buy the right software, and that's going to solve all the problems of efficiency, lack of access to data insights, or bad customer experience. This is false. You can invest in the sexiest, most powerful technologies and still not get a return on your investment if you don't have full adoption of the new processes and the technology change. So one of the things we talk about a lot at TomorrowZone is how the technology is such a small part of getting an actual return on your software investments. The human side matters way more than you might think. So this conversation isn't about traditional box checking change management approaches or implementing software tools. This is about the human side of transformations, the mindsets, the strategies that make real change stick. So let's dive in. Michele, I just want to welcome you to the show again.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
So we've been working together on a lot of client projects. And I know that in your experience, you've seen how people can react differently to change, from excitement to fear, even confusion. And from your experience over the years, how do these emotional responses influence the success of a technology project?
Well, honestly, Deb, in my experience, the success of a technology project ultimately depends on the people involved. It's not about the software. It's about how it's going to affect the people. And by people, I mean both those that are driving the initiative and those that will be impacted by its outcomes. So like you said, it doesn't matter how advanced the technology is. It doesn't matter how ambitious your goals are. It's the people that are the most vital factor in determining a project's success. I really believe this, and it's essential to really nurture these people and be uber observant and supportive of everyone that's involved throughout the process. And the key really lies in maintaining that empathetic perspective. And I'm constantly asking questions that have nothing to do with technology. How are they interpreting the information? You know, especially if we're on video, I'm watching their facial expressions. I'm watching their gestures. I'm watching whether they speak or don't speak. I'm watching if they are resisting, if I see some sort of resistance or, God forbid, disengagement. And then I try to drill down into what's driving this disengagement. But I really feel that by approaching it like this and not just the project and the group itself, but each individual empathetically and understanding who they are and what they are, it's really possible to build those really strong connections that you need to address their individual concerns when necessary and to create, most of all, a shared purpose. And that's what the project is all about. It really fosters alignment. And honestly, if you can build this, it paves the way to a successful outcome.
I love that so much. And I think it's so interesting that even though we're talking about technology implementations, a lot of your focus is on what's happening with the humans and how are the humans responding. I want to just back up a moment because I blasted right past doing an intro of your background. And I think for our listeners who might not know you, or maybe they didn't hear the previous episode where we learned all about you, could you just briefly touch on your background? Because I think it's interesting that you're bringing business and software background to this perspective.
Sure. So I come from beginning my financial career in equipment finance way back. I won't say how far back, but in a variety of aspects of equipment finance, in bank owned, in independence, starting a captive finance organization, and worked at almost every department within a financial institution. There came a time where I thought I needed a break from that, and I was seduced by the software industry, by people that I worked with in the financial industry to bring in my expertise and my experience into the software world. And in that world, I really was able to penetrate in multiple areas. So from startups to huge international software firms and organizations, a variety of people all over the world. That has been a spectacular adventure for me. But bringing those two together really made me what I am today. And it's interesting. I was listening to a speech by Matthew McConaughey earlier today about connecting the dots. No, I take that back. It was Steve Jobs about connecting the dots, and that you can't connect them going forward. But if you look backward, you can see how they all connect and build on one another. And that's really been the story of my career.
Well, I really love how the dots have lined up for you because you bring such an interesting perspective. And I wanted you to share that because, you know, what you are bringing out and the way that you're observing people during these implementations, I think that by being in all of these different experiences where you have seen how people respond all over the world, you've been able to come up with some interesting insights on the patterns that we typically see. And you mentioned that you have to really focus on building connection, addressing concerns, creating a sense of shared purpose. I've seen similar dynamics in the work that I've done. My background also is in equipment finance as well as software, and I've been consulting now for 11 fun-filled years in my own company, TomorrowZone. And one of the things that I have noticed, whether I'm working with equipment finance companies, I'm working with banks, and whether it's retail lending, commercial lending, it really doesn't matter. Whenever we are implementing a complex system and a complex change, especially when it's cross-functional, clear communication and shared understanding is the primary thing that I look at that can help to cut through fear, because wonder can create a sense of worry, and we tend to come up with the worst case scenario. But a little clarity goes a long way, and it's not something that it's one and done. A lot of times I see teams thinking, oh, we did the presentation at the kickoff, we gave that message once.
Right.
How many times does it really take you to get the message internalized in a way that you understand, that you can act on it? I mean, you think about in your own life, how many times do you need to see an ad before you start to remember it, or any message, So one and done doesn't do it. And so we need to be looking at clear communication and shared understanding continually throughout the life of an effort. And that's one of the things that we focus on a lot at TomorrowZone. I'm just thinking about an example from a client that we're both working with, and we do a series of stand-up meetings. And one of the reasons that we do that is not just to stay in tune with what's going on the project, but whenever I'm attending those regular stand-up meetings, they're really short meetings, but it keeps the momentum going. But the thing that I'm always watching for is, are we clear? Are we communicating? Do we still have a shared understanding of what we're doing? And I'm constantly watching the people on the call to see, are we getting through if I see any hint of confusion, whether it's in their facial expression or even their silence, I'll jump in and push for that clarity and draw those people into the conversation so that we can just get things out on the table rather than letting them fester or become points of contention or confusion. And so I think you bring up such an important point. Like, we often think it's all about the technical project management or the details of the actual technical implementation. But I think coming in with that lens where you're observing what's going on with the humans involved in this project is really one of those things that sets TomorrowZone apart in our approach.
I agree with your comments 100%. And the people, as far as I'm concerned, are on the top of the list. Without them, it doesn't happen. And cutting through that fear with clear communication is critical. And we have to understand this is fearful for most people. They've never been involved in anything like this before. And you and I both know we're very comfortable with the unknown. But are most people? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Quick question for you, though. So as you're cutting through the fear, how do you go about creating it in a way that resonates across diverse teams? I have a way to do it, but I'm interested to hear, your approach on that.
Yeah. So a couple examples come to mind. So when I first started my company, one of the roles that I played was the technology consultant to the chairman and CEO of a large regional bank. And so I was working across very diverse teams because I was working across all of the lending divisions of that company, 6 different lending divisions. So a lot of diversity, even though they were all doing lending, they were all speaking a slightly different dialect of lending from one line of business to the next. And I was in meetings all the time. I was standing at whiteboards all the time, trying to help teams to see the big picture because often they were missing the big picture. And I remember one day my husband asked, "What is it that you do?" And off the top of my head, I said, "I think the thing I do the most is I make people talk to each other." I mean, the big thing I was doing is connecting people across the enterprise, across the organization that, first of all, they didn't have a big picture understanding of actually what their organization looked like and how it was structured, let alone where they fit into that big picture, and where they had colleagues that were doing something similar, where they could actually be sharing best practices and insights and ideas with each other. And I started connecting them with each other to have conversations that they've never had before. And I think that, one of the big ways that I help teams with this is to facilitate those conversations that they've never had before, to get things, there's a lot of brilliant stuff in the brains of our team members, but you have to actually pull it out and get it on the table and create a way for us to work with that information. So the other thing that we do is, and I say this all the time, go visual as fast as possible. Whenever I've got a group of people that are talking about something, and I use this illustration all the time for AI. Think about when we talk about AI, everybody's saying the same words, AI, 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 AI. But if you imagine like the cartoon version of your conversation, if you could see the thought bubbles over everybody's head, there's a different picture in every one of those thought bubbles. We don't have a shared understanding of what we're talking about, whether it's a term or whether it's the big picture of our project. And so one of the things that we do regularly is use visuals, whether it's a presentation to support a conversation, or we're actually hopping into Mural, which is the digital whiteboard platform that we use to actually co-create that big picture together. It's hard to be on the same page if you don't see the same page. But when you involve people in seeing it and co-creating it, it actually starts to reduce the fear, because they're now a part of it. And it's not, the vision, if they're part of creating it, it's no longer something that's being imposed on them. It's something that they're a part of creating. And it just, really starts to reduce the level of anxiety and fear that we see in people when we do go through a process like that. So I want to shift gears a little bit because this is something that, you're really, really good at. And I want to talk about just the mindset and organizational culture that we encounter when it comes to technology change. A lot of different companies in our industry and equipment finance are going through this right now as they're implementing modern leasing core systems, or maybe they're, innovating in some area of their business to accelerate credit or whatnot. But one of the big types of resistance that we run into is we've always done it that way.
The comfort zone.
Yes. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about that challenge and how you see it?
Oh, yeah. We run into this all the time, and it's that fear of change, right? And how do you break through that fear? How do you break through the resistance? I have a number of things that I try to address to foster more openness to change and continuous learning. And one of the things I do is to sort of foster their own self-awareness. So rather than me telling them this is what we need to do and this is how we need to do it, I start asking them to reflect on themselves and self-evaluate the current situation.
What's an example of that? Like if you can think of a project that we've worked on recently, what's an example of how you've done that with a team in the midst of a project?
Yeah. So I've had clients who are just like, well, we do this all the time. And I ask them to, please explain how you're currently managing this. How what happens when you need to make a change or when you're trying to improve something? What is it that you're doing? And they'll explain what they do. And I'll listen very attentively. And then I'll say, well, how's that working for you? In other words, why are we in this project? So, and I try to do it in a very non-confrontational way, though it's a direct question, and it does encourage them to sort of take the next step to assess, am I really being effective in this? And more often than not, the answer is going to be, well, it's really not working, or something similar to that, right?
Yeah.
So it helps them to recognize themselves the limitations and shortcomings of the existing method that they're using. And actually, they are asking it of themselves. Well, let me think, does it really work for me? And this becomes a pivotal moment when they acknowledge the fact that, it's not all that it's cracked up to be just because it's been this way all along. So it opens this conversational door for us to have a very different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to, and at that point, it's time for me to start bringing them in. And I start asking other questions like, well, what would success look like to you? How do you foresee this being business? If it were a perfect world, what would it look like? And then I ask things like, what's your biggest obstacles? And how might we clear some of those things? So they're creating the solution as we talk. And rather than continuing the conversation on the negative of these are all things that we think are not working, we then move into a more positive conversation of change. And they are creating it. And as you just said, they become part of it. And now we've got buy-in, and now we can have a meaningful conversation that can really facilitate and expedite change.
So I really love this approach to opening the door to a deeper conversation that really gets people on board with the change. Some of the work we do at TomorrowZone is actually with technology companies themselves, helping them help their customers adopt their solutions successfully. And one of the things I've noticed with technology people, whether they are working for a finance company or a technology company, they can sometimes get uncomfortable with this level of conversation because the fear is that you're opening the door to a blue sky blank page wish list type conversation. But actually, if you really listen deeply to what Michelle's doing, she's not. What we're doing is we're opening the door to an exploration of the why behind the issues and the real problem to solve. And so it isn't soliciting more requirements. That's not what we're doing in a conversation like this, because this is about helping the humans adapt to the change and adapt to what really is a very uncertain future. The future state in a radical or complex process or systems change is very uncertain for the humans. And so you have to engage in this kind of conversation to bring the people along and open the door, but also for the tech people to properly frame the problem to be solved so that we're solving the right problem and we don't end up with expensive rework in the future, but also to understand the context around the problem. It's one thing to understand the problem to be solved and make sure you're solving the right problem. It's another thing entirely to understand the environment in which that problem exists. And success on these projects is all about understanding that context. And that is the one thing that I see every other consulting situation get wrong whenever we encounter a troubled project that we're called in to fix. And so really focusing on driving for that context, bringing the humans in, bringing the team in, and bringing in their diverse perspectives into that conversation helps us not only identify the problem to solve, but to agree that, yeah, I guess that really is something we need to solve. Now we can get on board with the next steps to make that happen.
If I less is more what you just said, we're going back to clear communication, shared understanding, building trust and collaboration.
Yes.
To build a future.
Yeah.
Right? So these are our steps. And this is where I think TomorrowZone excels in guiding them along this path. And it just builds and builds and builds over time, where we can transform even the problem children that are resisting this whole project into enthusiastic adopters.
Yeah.
And it's so rewarding to do this kind of work and to watch their lives transform.
Yeah. And it really is about inviting them to a conversation about what that new future could look like. And it's a progressive realization of what the future could be. And one of the challenges that I see is, in complex projects, the picture of the future remains fuzzy for a while. And so it's a conversation that you have to continue to have and don't become weary in having that conversation. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of persistence to help bring people along. Again, back to it's not a one and done scenario. I want to move on to another big piece of this where, we can see successful tech adoption derail if it's not handled well. And that's project management and decision making. So, Michele, one of the big scary words we hear a lot, and back in the day, I used to be a project manager. I'm not a project manager. But I remember when I had to manage a big complex project a long, long time ago, I drew a monster on the whiteboard and I called it scope creep.
Yeah.
This is the scope creep. I gave it a persona. But, scope creep is when, we think we know what we're building and we've decided on it. And then it just kind of mushrooms as more and more things get added. You see that happen in all sorts of different kinds of projects. I mean, even, Christmas dinner recently, we're going to make beef stew. Oh, we should also make wild rice soup. Wait, there's only 4 people, scope creep.
Yeah.
So, scope creep can derail even the best projects. But, how do you help teams to stay focused on their goals and objectives without losing sight of the big picture and help kind of contain that monster a little bit?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, scope creep.
It's so creepy.
It's a nasty term and it comes up all the time. And lots of times we focus on getting the teams excited and getting them on board with something new. And they do get excited. And then all of a sudden they want to do everything under the sun. And we have to pull them back and say, hey, just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Or doesn't mean we should now, but
right.
Maybe we should later.
Exactly. So when that does happen, I am fully embracing and supporting their excitement, but that's when I begin to start to focus back on the why. Why are we here? What are we looking to achieve? And monitoring that, throughout the process, monitoring that people are staying, I don't want to say within the box because the box flexes as well during the project, but let's not invite scope creep to the party. Then we want to just monitor the tasks and the people, keep them on track, and continually remind them of the foundational goals. And sometimes, just wait. When we pull back, not just do because we can, but should we now? How does this correlate with our original our original foundational goals? And I say, why are we here? What are we looking to accomplish? Why are we here? What are we looking to accomplish? That's just something I continue to enroll them in and continue to empower projects leads to be the gatekeepers on that, even when I'm not involved or when the consultants aren't involved. And this is something that they need to continue even after we leave, right? Mm-hmm. They need to set the clear boundaries and manage the expectations of the team. Hey, this is why we're doing this at this time. We're adding this to phase 2, or this is a roadmap item. So what I found is guidance that's delivered by internal leaders carries a lot more influence and credibility than messages from an external consultant. So I tend to meet with the leaders of the teams when I see this is happening. Great, we have excitement, but this messaging needs to come from their leaders.
Yeah. I think that's important because it sets you up as a partner with the leadership. And you're not like, oh, that's the committee of no over there. Every time we want something, they say no, it's scope creep. But actually, it's not about that. It's about we're all working together to achieve the goals that we set and remember the reason why we started on this journey in the first place. And you can lose sight of that so fast in these projects.
And the reason why they've brought in a consultant, not to take over, but to empower them to be successful now and later.
Well, and I think you bring up a really important point there. We want them to be successful now, implementing this, going live, and later, because it doesn't end with going live. I think that's another myth that people get caught up in our industry is, there's this big push and Herculean effort to get into production on a system. But one of the things that we advise our customers to think about is the ongoing care and feeding of the system, because you're not going to get the ROI. You're not going to get the tech adoption if you don't have the structures and strategies set up for that company to take ownership of their own digital destiny after we leave. And I think that's a big piece of the foundation that we help to put in place.
That actually leads me to one more item that I try to work into this as we are empowering leaders is incorporating visual tracking tools. So similar to what you do with Mural, we want to track, we want to focus, and we want to make sure we stay on course. And I kind of liken this to a GPS, right? You use your GPS and it tells you where you're going and how you're going to get there. But scope creep is when it begins to recalculate the route. And that's the dreaded problem, right? Yeah. If we start to feel like we're recalculating, we need to pull back.
Remember those old GPS devices? And I don't know if it's because it was like you just kind of ignore it. And then you end with like U-turn.
Right. Hey, my navigation still does that. I don't have AI on mine quite yet.
Oh no, you gotta upgrade. Waze is awesome.
Oh, I use Waze. Waze does that for me too, but I'm expecting it to say, no, Michelle, you really need to take this route.
So I think you bring up a really important point too, the visual tracking tools. And, I started doing that. So I'm just going to tell a story where the visual tracker came from that we use. So I was leading a really huge project when I was working for TCF Equipment Finance. They're not around anymore. They were bought by Huntington. But anyway, we were implementing one of the first end-to-end integrated origination platforms in the industry. So this was early days. And we had a lot going on. It was going cross-functional. We had a really huge list of issues that we needed to work through. And I brought a team together in person because we were, it was a distributed team. And so I brought together the finance company and the software company's people, got them all in a room, and I set up a whole week. We called it Tweak Week. So people that were on that project will remember that distinctly because we had a lot of work we needed to get done. But the thing that I saw was that we needed to build camaraderie and trust and teamwork and a shared understanding of the sense of urgency around exactly what we needed to get done and by when. And so we spent that week together, team building and working together collaboratively. But throughout the week, I had this tracker on the screen and I built a pie chart into it that every time we closed an issue would turn more and more green. So it went from red to yellow to green. And then the mantra was go green, go green. By the end of the week, the team was hooked on the pie chart. Show us the pie, show us the pie. And every time they would close an issue, we would mark it done and then we'd get a little more green on the pie. But, having some sort of progress meter is, a really great way to insert a little bit of micro celebration along the way. If you hold off to have celebration and recognition of your wins until you actually go live, that's way too long. When people are working on projects like this, it's intense and there are so many moving parts. It's mentally taxing, emotionally, even physically. And so you've got to insert ways for people to continue to maintain that shared understanding of where are we now on the way to where we're going, and have reasons to celebrate those, accomplishments, those milestones.
Any reason to have cake would be good.
Yeah.
Whole thing, but it's big meaning.
Yeah. And even, like in the project that we're working on right now, when you think about it, a lot of times the executives that are in these projects, they've never done this before. Or it's been maybe a decade or two since they've been on this type of journey. Because when we're talking about a major complex system implementation, that should be a once in a decade or more type of project. It's like if you think about building a house, you don't need to rebuild the foundation constantly. You would spend your money on remodeling and new features, expansion and whatnot. And that's what we're doing in these system projects. And so as I'm guiding my clients, one of the things I'm looking for is, oh, wait, they don't understand what a big deal it is that they just achieved this thing. And I will actually call it out and insert a little bit of celebration into the meeting. And it's not, we don't have to stop and order a cake or anything like that. It might just be, hey, let's just stop and recognize how cool it is that so-and-so just did X, and I think that that's something that you can insert into any kind of project to keep your team motivated and also to show progress. Because if you wait too long before the team can see progress, you'll start to see them get demotivated.
I agree. And it's not even the milestone. Sometimes it's a special skill that's learned. I'll give you an example. The client we're working on together too is they were just learning how to use the platform that they've been on for 5 years. And because we are approaching things slightly differently and opening the doors of conversation, they've become more creative. in how they solution within their platform. Well, if I can do this here and I can do that there, I bet we can do this other thing right here, and it works. And they're getting such a sense of satisfaction.
Well, I want to just double click on that, because I think that example is really important, and I don't know if people really think this way about technology implementations. But when we talk about owning your own destiny when it comes to your digital transformation, that's about not only having the technology in place. It's about empowering your team to be able to use and manage and maintain and expand that technology over time. And so what we're talking about is empowering people to get with the change. And sometimes that does involve skill building, and you have to be intentional about that. But I often run into, leadership teams that haven't even thought about that. They haven't thought past how much does this software license cost, And so when we help companies build roadmaps, it's actually multidimensional. And one of the lanes in the roadmap is, what do we need to do with the people to support your technology strategy long term?
Right. And that kind of moves into another idea in terms of the roles of people that are within the project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know that when we talked about doing this podcast, one of the things you wanted to talk about was the roles. And how do we establish that? How do we position that? How do we enable them to thrive dependent on the roles? They don't even know what the roles are.
So when we think about our examples in equipment finance, software companies coming in and they got a cool, sexy tool and it's going to solve everything. And technically, it can do just about anything. But the biggest challenge is that you're not just implementing software, you're changing your organizational operating system. And a major component of how an organization operates is how that organization makes decisions. Who makes decisions about what and when and why and how? And one of the things that I've found in my work over the years is a lot of times organizations aren't even clear about how they make decisions. And so we actually, when it comes to high stakes, complex projects like these, I actually walk the leadership team through the conversations and the exercises to actually lay it out in writing. This is who makes decisions about what components of the project and when and how, so that we're very clear, and then we communicate it. And we don't just write that up and put it in a corner. I will actually ask leaders to pull that out from time to time. Let's revisit it. And a big thing that I'm asking, and I will jump in and into the conversation between the software provider and the client, is to often ask questions like, okay, so you said this needs to be done by this time. Who decides what done looks like? Who decides what success looks like? And who's making the decision about whether that criteria has been met? Mm-hmm. If you're not clear about how those things are going to play out on your project from the start, you are pretty much set up for an anxiety-filled drama fest of an implementation. I've seen this pattern play out over and over and over, whether it's in equipment finance, banking, commercial lending, retail lending. It doesn't matter. I have done so many project retrospectives in the past 15 years. It's a pattern that plays out too often. And so I think that getting really clear about decision making is a major component to your ability to successfully adopt new technology in your company.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And I think that lots of times we may have an idea of what the decision-making matrix needs to look like. One of the first things we do is we understand who is on the project team and what they currently do in the organization, which may not be what they will do in the project, right? It may be completely different. And then once we share sort of the big picture and everyone starts to understand what's happening, we connect roles that are needed for the project to expected outcomes. And that doesn't have anything to do with the title in the organization. It has to do with skill set. It has to do with the tasks that need to be performed. And sometimes even the type of person that we're dealing with, right? They're best at certain tasks. One of the things that I go through as we begin to really establish who would really be best in the organization assigned to particular roles within the project team is that when we do that, they don't feel like they're sent out to the wolves, right? So again, coming back to the human part of it, even though we say, hey, Susan, you're going to be great at this particular task, so we're going to have you on this team and have you lead that. Like you said, they may not have been involved in this ever in their life, or perhaps a decade ago. So it's completely new, or it's happened a long time ago. So that support and that encouragement and that guidance from those of us that are experienced in this provides so much value to those participants. And that's a lot of what TomorrowZone does, as well as consultants in this, is really sort of empower them and bring them that comfort and that encouragement that we're going to be here, we're going to watch what happens, we're going to look for the holes, and we're going to help you fill them. And so when it comes to that, building that RACI and building that decision matrix, first of all, who's authorizing the decision making? We need to understand that. Mm-hmm. We need to understand why quick decisions are so important to the project.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are like, yeah, I can make decisions, and then it takes them 3 weeks to make a decision. This is a big problem.
Yes.
Project.
Yes.
And then ensure that everybody understands the chain of command, not just within the project, but after they go live. What does that look like? Because inevitably, there's going to be hurdles, there's going to be roadblocks, and we need to escalate. And they all need to understand what that looks like. And that's why it's just so important to really fully understand that.
You bring up a really important point, and I want to just make it tangible and practical. One of the ways that we do this is by mapping out those processes visually. Here's what it looks like now, and here's how it's going to change. Helping them to actually envision what that future state is going to look like so that they can start to see themselves in it, and then gradually exposing them to the system as it's starting to come together so that they're starting to actually get hands-on, and now that picture of what their future looks like is starting to get even more clear, and so it's a progression, and again, it's not a one and done kind of thing, but the more that you can bring visuals to the process, whether it's demos of the system or it's actual process flow charts showing the before and after, and really helping people to internalize how their role is going to change, all of those things go a long way to really helping people to envision the future state. And ultimately, in a lot of these projects, because technology has evolved so much, what technology enables us to do is give people a bigger job. Now they're acting.
Talk more a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this is something that I'm going to go back to the early days of my career. When we started up TCF Equipment Finance, Craig Dahl, the founder, he would always say, give people a bigger job. Let's leverage technology to take touches out of the process, give people a bigger job. And so when we think about where technology is going and what's possible with reimagining processes, reimagining your role in your job, when we bring intelligent automation into the picture, now you can behave less like a robot doing data entry and more like a human, being creative, critical thinking, connecting with your colleagues and your customers in more meaningful ways. That's a bigger job. And that's a much more exciting picture of the future than, let's just build the past on new technology.
Yeah, that's the whole, this is the way we've always done it. So let's just automate that.
Yeah. So I want to wrap this up. And one of the things I want to talk about is one of the foundational principles at TomorrowZone is thinking long-term. while we're acting in the short term. And so, I often see teams thinking that going live is the end, cutting over is the end game. But in reality, that's just the beginning of your new normal, of your new operational model in your company. And so sustainability is often overlooked after the project goes live. So, Michele, how do you ensure that teams are set up for long-term success?
Well, there's a couple of super important responses I have to that. So the first one we've already touched on in terms of self-administration and full ownership. It's really important that they understand this at the onset of the project, because that person is going to be vital and critical going forward, person or persons, right? They need to be involved with what happens, how it evolves from a business perspective, from a user perspective, from all these different perspectives. And they need to be able to, going forward, implement quick enhancements, have a solid change management policy, understand how things are going to work going forward. And as we go through the project, we begin to set them up for that success, so that when we do leave and go live, they are armed for the future, not only in what their roadmap's going to look like or how they expect enhancements to evolve, but how they're going to support that activity in a very reasonable and structured way. The other thing is, as we talked about different phases and roadmaps and stuff like that, phasing is so important to the ongoing success, the care and feeding of all this. So sure, everybody wants everything yesterday, but we have to pace the innovation. And it's really another vital key to success. So if phase one went great, we executed it effectively, the project team is excited about it and envisions what might be possible. So I call this kind of inspiring innovation, which is great. I love it. But again, we need to temper it, and we need to channel their enthusiasm, again, in a very structured and phased way for improvement going forward. And if they follow that plan, the client can continue with their transformation journey in a very successful way. And there's a few things that they always have to think about as they go through this each time. Each time something needs to be enhanced, changed, a new phase. Clear priorities. What is our priorities for this time frame? Realistic timeframes. Can we get it done within the time frame we're looking at? And focused objectives for every single phase, every single enhancement. I think those are three very important things that they need to look at.
Well, and I think that thinking about this sustainability from the start really sets up a team to successfully adopt the technology. And you'll actually get a return on that investment, because when you're first implementing a new system, really what you're doing is you're setting up a foundation. What has to be in place for us to be able to build on for the future. But then when you do set up those structures and you're engaging people to understand what those structures are going to be, we're not only building the tool set for the ongoing care and feeding of this system, but we're actually building the mindset as well as the skill set.
They need to understand why it needs to be structured. What happens if it isn't? So educating
and how to
them
do it
to that before we leave gives them the power and the strength to say, yes, we're doing it. We're doing it within this structure. And here's the reason why we do it this way. Because we've done it that way in the past, and look what happened. So the whole "how's that working for you" thing should improve over time.
Yeah, well, and we even did this a couple of years ago. We had a client go live, and we actually set up for them the change advisory board within their company and coached the leader on how to lead those sessions. So we joined for the first couple, and then they were able to take it over from there. But now they have actually a process for introducing change into their system over time. And it's a new discipline, it's a new tool set, but it's also a skill set. And a little coaching goes a long way on things like that to help you maintain your ability to get an ROI from your tech spend.
Right. Safely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on building champions and in projects to drive successful adoption?
Well, I personally think that internal champions are critical to a project. And there may be one, there may be multiples. The more you have, the better. And there's a few things I look for when you're trying to identify the champions within the organization. So the first one is enthusiastic individuals, people that are excited about the project. They have a great energy that they bring to the project. The other thing is, are they an influencer within their organization? Do other people in the organization look to them for advice or expertise, whether it's project related or not? And the third one is, if it's available, previous experience and people that have been through a project similar to this before, and whether it's good or bad is both acceptable, because we want to get that input. Everyone wants to improve over time, or they may have had a great experience that they can bring to the project. So all that is wonderful if that's possible. Once we can identify the champions, then I go through and individually start to really get to know them, right? What are their interests? What are their concerns? How are they motivated? One of the things I sort of do kind of behind the scenes is I try to learn how they can become a hero in their organization. And people don't always think of themselves this way, but who doesn't want to be, right? You want to, everybody wants to help. So I really try to understand what's their stake in the outcome. How will that elevate not only them, their group, their organization? It's a feel good type of thing, right? So once we've got all that in place, the last thing is to just really empower these champions with knowledge of the technology, with knowledge of the process, with tools. We talked about the visual tracking tools, how they can socialize these improvements throughout the organization and build excitement themselves. It's like we said before, coming from them is a lot more powerful than coming from somebody on the outside.
Yeah.
And the last thing I do is, again, back on the human side, encouragement and support for them individually. So giving them a soft place to fall as they build the skill and as they run into that inevitable messy middle that we always talk about, roadblocks, right? I've had so many clients who, call me sort of offline and say, hey, Michele, I'm dealing with this, that, and the other. And they just need to vent it out and talk about it. And they need a soft place to fall.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think TomorrowZone excels at as well.
I really appreciate the work that you do in that regard, because a lot of the stuff that you're doing behind the scenes, I'm watching even as we have one of these projects unfolding right now. And I'm seeing those heroes start to stand up.
Yep.
And they're starting to really step into their new role. And it's such a win, because those wins that you're getting that involve empowering your people to be able to take on the new future of adopting technology, those are the wins that are really going to propel you into that new future and sustain that success. Anybody can implement software, but building the people to actually leverage that software to grow your company, that's a whole other thing.
Right. The software becomes a partner and not an obstacle.
We've been talking about how to drive successful technology adoption. So, I always ask, what can leaders do today to shape a more awesome future? How would you respond to that when it comes to successful technology adoption?
Well, can I have two instead of one? I have two quick ones.
Just this time.
Thank you. The first one is, I really encourage them to champion collaboration between technology and business units. They speak different languages, and if they could speak to each other and work together, it breeds real innovation success. But that's something, again, back toward the shared understanding. If they can champion that, that is going to be a huge gold star going forward for the team in general. And the other one is to embrace the power of the pause now and in the future.
Yes.
So to not be afraid to stop everything, take a short breather. That messy middle we talk about, sometimes it becomes a runaway train. We want to stop it, take a breath. It can mean all the difference between success, burnout, and all-out failure. This is an invaluable tool to get comfortable with.
Yes.
So those are the two things that I think are the most important things I would try to explain to leaders going forward to try to really embrace.
Yeah, I agree. Collaboration and the ability to pause when you need to. Yeah, those are powerful tools. I would say, thinking about these strategies before you kick off the project is the one thing I would love leaders to consider if they really want to shape a more awesome future. And of course, if you want help with that, that is our specialty at TomorrowZone. Give us a call. So, Michele, it's just been awesome exploring these ideas with you. I think that your insights into the human and practical sides of technology adoption are just invaluable. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure as always.
Yeah, it's always awesome talking with you. To our listeners, today we explored everything from breaking down resistance to change to inspiring future state visions and building sustainable success in technology initiatives. I'm curious, what stood out to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can connect with us on LinkedIn or visit tomorrowzone.io. I invite you to like and subscribe to this podcast. Share it with a colleague who might be navigating technology adoption challenges right now. Until next time, stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.